that NIST has become a political, not a scientific agency, and the rest of my book bears that out on every issue, whether you're talking about the origin of the fires, the temperatures the steel could have reached, or the nature of the collapse. And so besides ignoring the other evidence, of course, is, and I'm sure you've talked about it a lot on your show, is the new evidence of the nanothermite in the World Trade Center dust. And this is, I think, one of the two most convincing things to the ordinary person, because as Niels Harrit said when he was asked about this, the interviewer on Danish TV said, well, just because you found all that nanothermite in the dust, what makes you think that was what was used to bring down the buildings? And he said, well, why else would have it been there? I mean, we're not talking about a few specks. We're talking about an enormous amount of nanothermite that was still unexploded. And so they say, this is not the smoking gun, this is the loaded gun. The gun was still loaded. You put a torch to it, it explodes. And yet the defenders of the official story try to say, oh, this was just, these are red chips, that was just primer paint. Well, put a match to some primer paint and see if it explodes.
And then you have all the film footage from mainline TV crews of this white, yellow metal just pouring out and dropping for hundreds and hundreds of feet when aluminum doesn't act in any way like that. And then you have them saying there was enough heat in Tower 1 and 2 to suddenly make the buildings explode top down. Meanwhile, giant columns right next to men and women waving their shirts. Humans aren't burning. They're not melting, but giant columns right next to them are. After the fire department had reported that in both towers, the fires were not as strong as they had been, and in one tower, almost completely dissipating, we have the firefighter tapes. Yeah.
And there's just example after example. Let's talk about the Van Jones affair for a second. The premise there of why he had to resign was that anybody who signed a document saying there should be a new investigation, therefore even just suggesting that maybe the official story wasn't true, that such a person is unworthy to be a public servant because there's something obviously wrong with his mind. Well, if people really know what the official story is, if they know how NIST explanation, which is the official story about the towers, if they know their explanation, there has to be something wrong with their minds if they believe that. And the most obvious example of this, now to skip to the final chapter of my book, is their own admission that the building came down in free fall. Now, we have been saying virtual free fall. They admitted, after David Chandler proved it, that the building came down in absolute free fall. Now, this is, of course, free fall through the air, not through a vacuum, so there's a slight resistance from the air. But if you had dropped a brick off the top of the building, at the same time the top floor of the building, the roof line, started coming down, for the first 2.25 seconds, the brick and the top floor of the building would have gone along at the same rate. Now, when NIST put out its preliminary report, what it called its draft for public comment in August of 2008, Shyam Sundar, in a technical briefing, explained why absolute freefall would be impossible. Because, he said, there are things in the way. And freefall means that the stuff coming down is not encountering anything. It's encountering zero resistance. And he said, well, there's all that steel, all that concrete, all that stuff there. So that would use up energy moving that out of the way. So it couldn't be in free fall. Well, then David Chandler got on YouTube, put a piece on there, and slowed it down, measured it, and showed that it was absolute free fall for over 2 seconds.
And now NIST has had to change their story again and admit, okay, there was some free fall.
Yeah, but they didn't change their theory. They still have a theory of progressive collapse based on fire, and still deny, of course, that explosives were used. And, we know, anybody who knows anything about these things knows that for this to come down with a horizontal roof line, virtually horizontal coming down, and in free fall, that means all 82 steel columns had to be removed simultaneously.
Well, David,
there's no way, even if this had been a towering inferno, that fire could have caused this. And so now what they have is an absolute contradiction in their final report. They've got a theory that says free fall is impossible, as Sunder himself had explained, and yet they admit as an empirical fact that free fall occurred. And one thing I pointed out in the book is very revealing. In the draft for public comment, they kept saying after every statement of this nature, and this is consistent with physical principles, and this is consistent with physical principles, sort of ad nauseum. In the final report, which came out in November, they removed all of those statements.
Okay, David.
So they were no longer claiming that their final report was consistent with the principles of physics.
Now, again, you're being very academic about this, and that's very important because that's who we want to really focus on this is scientists, researchers, scholars. But to put it in layman terms for camp-following debunkers who really think that the official story is 100% true, I think it's important to note here that 6 of the 10 commission members have made statements like fraud, cover-up, criminal cover-up. There should be a criminal investigation. The head lawyer, Farmers, got a book from the commission coming out saying total cover-up, a lie. We agreed day one to not tell the truth to the public. These are all statements. And not only have they lied the whole time, they're constantly changing the goalpost and constantly changing their stories and then making fun of us when we've never seen buildings do this in history, when you got firemen and police saying get back, they're going to blow it up, when you have the PNAC document saying we need to have a giant Pearl Harbor, 3,000 dead level event, we've got lying about the WMDs, we've got Cheney wanting to blow up ships 3 years ago and blame it on the Iranians. That's now public. Fox Fowlin, their admiral, resigning. We've got Gulf of Tonkin, all these other events. I mean, you'd have to be insane not to know that every arrow, every dotted line, everything aims at inside job. I mean, I wish it wasn't an inside job. I wish that I didn't have to go up against these people. I know you were doing other things and already acclaimed before you got involved in this. Worldwide as a best-selling author and researcher and lecturer and theologian. I mean, it's just conscience demands that they're saying the earth is flat. We have to say it's round. And I know that's a bit of a rant there, but what's your thoughts on the statement I just made?
Well, I agree, and let me go back to this point about the physical impossibility of this. You know, our most vicious criticisms have come from the left. People such as George Monbiot, people such as Alexander Cockburn, and those two in particular have accused us of believing in magic. Well, what I just described to you about the official report on Building 7 is magic. For a building to come down without the steel being removed by explosives in absolute free fall, meaning there was zero resistance, that's magic. That's a miracle. And as I point out in the book, it is not allowed in one of the reasons this is an unscientific report. It is not allowed in science to appeal to a miracle. You can't, you know the joke about the guy up on the blackboard, the physicist. He's got all these formula covering board after board after board, and then at the very bottom it says, and then a miracle occurs. Well, you can't do that. But that is what NIST did. They gave us 600 and some pages graphs and explanations and arguments and so on. And then in the final pages, they say, well, then a miracle occurred. The building came down in absolute free fall.
But you're talking about 3 miracles occurred that day.
Yeah, now they haven't admitted that the Twin Towers came down in absolute free fall. I think if somebody went back and measured those the way that Chandler did, I don't know that somebody has. Now maybe somebody has, but I haven't seen it. Maybe there would be a period there, a few seconds, where they're coming down in absolute free fall too. That'd be important to find out. But if even one of them has, and it would still be a miracle if they were just coming down in virtual free fall. You can't even come close to free fall without explosives.
Now they've done the calculations.
Pardon?
I mean, well, you and others and physicists and engineers have done the calculations with the pancake. I mean, there's a major pause between each pancake and each structural failure.